Hey, welcome to another episode of Signal Fire Radio. Very special episode for you today. This is an exclusive that we are only releasing on Patreon, and I think you're going to find out why. We have some amazing guests here with us today. First, Beth Curtis, Paul Free, and then a gentleman that you all should know by now because it was the most downloaded episode yet of Signal Fire Radio is Peter Maguire. Now, Peter, you wanted us to talk to Beth and Paul.
Absolutely.
So honestly, maybe we'll ask a couple well-timed questions.
Sure.
But as far as I'm concerned, this is your episode.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought, given that we had the Marines' birthday and Veterans Day this week, I thought it was important to bring a veteran of the war on drugs. My friend Paul Free here served 25 years for marijuana. My hero here, Beth Curtis, has done more to get people serving life sentences for marijuana out of prison than probably anyone in the United States. Her brother, John Knock, was sentenced to a double life sentence for a conspiracy that never took place in probably the most egregious injustice in the war on drugs, in my opinion. I'll probably be writing about that soon. And as we lurch towards legal marijuana and Wall Street and these other cretins that didn't risk anything when the risks were penitentiary risks, I think we need to remember those who did the heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. And I think as North Carolina finally moves towards some sensible medical marijuana laws, that we need to kind of remember the past and remember the people that paid prices for where we are today. And as I said, nobody's done more to kind of rectify some of these things than Beth. And Paul and I kind of share a common heritage. We're both from Southern California. Paul surfed, spent a lot of time in Mexico, as I did. And
Baja, Rosarita.
Oh, yeah. And he was kind of the forefather of a very famous marijuana conspiracy called the Coronado Company that was featured in my book Tie Stick. But their tradecraft wasn't up to Paul's standards, so he cut them loose very early on, and probably wise because half of them wound up becoming confidential informants. And I think the thing that's really important that most people don't realize is that in the war on drugs, we really corrupted our criminal justice system because you faced a situation of either cooperating or if you chose to go to trial, the stakes went way up. And
a mandatory minimum life.
Yeah. So, and Paul went to trial and obviously didn't
got life.
Yeah. Because we have most of our listeners are in my age range, mid-30s to late 40s. And so we were young when the war on drugs kind of was pushed as policy. Yeah. Can you just kind of give us like an oral history just to remind us of how all of this started? And then I want to hear Paul's story. Everybody chip in on it. Y'all were all there. So
I can handle that part quickly, and then Beth can get into some of the injustices. But, it's our wars on whatever tend not to go so well.
Poverty, drug,
terror. And so, it really begins with Nixon, and it always is a situation where we're getting all these unintended consequences. So, one of the first things they do is close the Mexican border. And that's what Nixon does. And so what does that do? It drives smugglers all over the world to get better pot. And so it gets more and more sophisticated. The big shift in my mind in the war on drugs is 88 when the laws change. And that's when minimum mandatories come in and power shifts from judges to prosecutors. And so the key document in this era of criminal justice is your sentencing report. Where have you been a good boy? Have you cooperated enough? And even if you're a confidential informant, you don't really know whether they're going to give you a good report or a bad report, and you're never really off the hook. I interviewed a confidential informant that was setting people up for a decade, and big people at great risk. And it really never ends. Once you're in, you're in. And so I call it casino justice, and that's what Beth's brother faced. And you can talk a little bit about John's ridiculous case and tragic case.
My brother, in 1993, I remember my mother had gone to Hawaii. John's wife was at the University of Hawaii, completing her PhD. And my mother came home, and I said, "How is John?" She said she hadn't seen him. And it was very strange. And shortly after that, my sister-in-law called and said that John had been indicted. This was in 1994, and he was missing. And I secretly hoped that he'd always be missing, because he was indicted for a marijuana conspiracy, but at that time the indictment was not, we weren't able to know what was in it. So that's sort of when I started thinking about it. In 1996, he was arrested by Interpol in Paris, where he was at a payphone. Someone had called him and told him they were in trouble, and would he answer the phone on the Champs-Élysées. And he did. And he was held in the Prison de la Santé in France for 3 years, trying to keep from being extradited to the United States, because he knew if he was extradited that he wouldn't testify and that he'd probably get a life sentence. So we went back and forth to Paris to see him and to make sure he had legal counsel and everything. Finally, in 1999, the French court said that he could be extradited, but he could not be sentenced to more than 20 years. So he arrived in Gainesville, Florida, which was where he was indicted. It was a state and a place he'd never lived or worked. And he was tried the next year, and his PSI, which is pre-sentence report, which is done by the prosecutors or probation officer, they seem to be the same, said he was responsible for many hundreds of tons of marijuana marijuana and hashish that came into the United States and Canada, Europe, and Australia. And he was sentenced without having that amount found by the jury. He was sentenced by the judge to 2 life terms plus 20, and had a ridiculous fine of over $1.4 billion.
Can I jump in quickly?
Yes, please do, because this is amazing.
I mean, and it goes on and on and on. And, basically it was a bent cop who got busted for some coke conspiracy, had a life sentence hanging over his head, and said, "Hey, I know the biggest smuggler around." Yeah. And then got one of his co-conspirators to turn. That's who lured him to the payphone. So the only people who testified against him were federal agents and confidential informants. There was no weight. There was no conspiracy. And since John finally got out after, I think, 27 years, President Trump pardoned him. When I spoke to him on the phone, he said, "Yeah, once the guidelines shifted to life sentences, I didn't want to do anything in the United States." And yes, he had been involved in the cannabis trade. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But he was a smart guy, and he was a logistics operational guy, boats and that side of it. One of his co-defendants was a guy named Claude Debach, who was a Frenchman, and he was represented by F. Lee Bailey. Bailey wound up getting disbarred over this case. Bailey wound up getting stock from Debach in lieu of payment that was, I think, valued at $6 million first.
It was valued at $6 million, but that agreement was made kind of secretly between the prosecutors, Bailey, and a couple of the judge in the judge's chambers without a court reporter. They decided that if Bailey could have I think it was Biochem pharmaceutical stock.
Yeah.
It was Canadian stock. And when they found out that it had turned into $26 million,
Once it got FDA approval.
yeah, they had a change of heart, and Bailey was in trouble.
And Bailey went to prison. I
He
mean,
did.
He
He was
did a
sent-
month or something.
Yeah, before he.
And Bailey was the prosecutor?
No.
Bailey was the defense
Oh,
attorney.
defense
It was
attorney.
F. Lee Bailey.
One of the most famous criminal defense attorneys in American history.
Wow.
And at the top of his game, he
At
was
that time.
really good.
Yeah.
At that time, he was also working on the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yeah.
And you'll see that in some of the documents or some of the letters that he wrote. He talks about his difficulties with the O.J. trial. I'm sure Claude was unimpressed.
Yeah.
Because he was paying him for his. But it was a pretty corrupted thing, and it had a lot to do with money for that particular jurisdiction, and also for the attorneys.
Well, let me one thing that's really important to know is that when those kind of amounts of money get seized, the big battle then becomes the battle between customs and treasury and
Who's
DEA
taking it, right?
and local law enforcement, and they're getting sometimes 20%. So
Yes.
we've completely broken our criminal justice system by incentivizing with cash.
Was all that a matter of policy? Because my first question is, what in the hell was our society doing? Like, where were concerned citizens from a policy level? Like, were people behind this?
I don't think people understand what
Yeah.
conspiracy is.
Mm-hmm.
Our conspiracy laws are so broad that anybody can be pulled into a criminal situation if they're even peripherally involved, and they can be held responsible for everything that anybody did that they knew, and they can receive big sentences. And it's if they go to trial,
Yeah.
they'll get them.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not willing to tell a story that the prosecutors want them to tell about someone else and go to trial, they will be punished with the maximum sentence that they can give.
Is it very difficult because they're trying to prove a negative? I guess the person who's caught up in the conspiracy, is that the way that that justice is played out on this? They have to prove that they're not.
It's almost that way. Jurors don't want to believe that people like prosecutors who are
The system.
officers of the court,
Yeah.
that they will lie. They don't want to. And they don't have to lie because they can get other people who are frightened of getting a sentence themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Lie for them.
They will lie for them. Yes, and that's what happens. I started Life for Pot and started looking for people who had life sentences for marijuana only. And I just kept finding them. I didn't think I'd find any when I started. I thought it was impossible. And I found a lot of old marijuana smugglers who had smuggled tons and tons or were accused of that. But in the 80s, they were out in 10 years or 5 years or less. But starting in the 90s, I found people who were nonviolent, marijuana only, and had life sentences. And the common thread was they went to trial. And
So they exercise their constitutional
they
right.
exercised their constitutional
to
right.
face their accuser and have their day. Yeah.
The second common thread is conspiracy, because it's so easy to charge conspiracy. In my brother's case, there was no marijuana product. They had nothing.
There was no boat.
Right.
There was no boat.
There was
Right. Where did any evidence come into the case?
Cooperating witnesses who were afraid that they would get, who were actually even
Who were
threat-
feds and informants, though?
or maybe not. They were threatened with a life sentence.
Yeah.
And they had to they had to pretty much testify to a script. In fact, the main witness, who, when she was on the stand, my brother's attorney asked her what she was reading from.
Wow.
And she said, "Oh, these are my notes." He said, "Did you write them?" And she said, "No."
This was in front of the jury?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the way it was. And that's not at all.
Yeah.
You know. My brother also had the co-conspirator, who was Claude DeBach, had a European sensibility about justice and didn't have a clue about what the United States justice system was. And he was taken to grand juries all over in the United States and Canada. And he would testify to anything because they told him that if he did well, he'd get a 3 to 5 year sentence. In the end, he withheld a lot of money, and he was sentenced to a life term also without going to trial or having a plea agreement. So that's possible.
Wow.
Because he made a deal and he lied.
He made a deal
Yeah.
and he lied. And he shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And of course, it's hard to have a lot of empathy about that because he testified against so many people without even thinking about the veracity of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's our justice system.
And her website, liferpot.com, is still out there, and there's still people serving life sentences today in this country.
I do have. I've had
Wow.
a lot that when I started finding them, then I put them on a website. And after my brother's appeals, I had no attorney to talk to, or anything. So there was an attorney who was director of an organization called Drug Sense. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It was part of Drug Policy Alliance. I think it was one that was funded by Peter Lewis, who funded a lot of the marijuana legalization initiatives around the country. And his name was Don Wertschafter. And I saw that I knew I needed to talk to somebody, but I didn't know, I knew I had to start networking. So I kept calling him because he was about 60 miles from me. And he never returned my call. And finally he called me up and said, "I'm just calling you to tell you, don't call me anymore. I'm not practicing law." And I said, "Well, if you would just let me come down and talk to you for a couple hours, I just want to talk to you." And he said, "What do you want to talk about?" And I told him my brother. He said, "Put everything in your car and come down on Monday." And he was really my biggest source of support right, in 2006 and 2007, when all the high-paid attorneys were done, and they were high-paid. They were paid very well. So I did that, and he introduced me to a woman by the name of Nora Callahan, who had an organization called Razor Wire, and she was a real activist who told stories about prisoners, and so that was when I started looking for people and started telling stories.
How many of you identified through your work? How many people that have these life sentences for marijuana charges?
Dennis Cushone, when we were working on Obama's clemencies, when we were trying to get statistics for that, there are not a lot of life sentences for marijuana in the federal system. He thought he had started an organization called Clemency Report. He was a USA Today editor for a long time. And you have to kind of wiggle it out because the United States Sentencing Commission gives statistics, but they don't break it down to marijuana only.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's the majority of marijuana, they call it a marijuana offense.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think probably there are not that many who have life sentences. Maybe 70. There were 70 to 100 at that time. Now there are fewer because we've gotten a lot out.
Yeah.
But there shouldn't be any, and there shouldn't be any with de facto life sentences. I'm really pretty snarky now. Because of all the marijuana businesses, cannabis businesses that are making so much money, and they are lobbying. So
Well, you have John Boehner,
I
who's
know.
now,
Right.
who was John Boehner, who was the most anti-pot guy. You
Probably
could
the
imagine.
ugliest crier in,
and,
all of
and
the
then,
Congress.
And then, I had a change of heart.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's what I was saying before, that it really does bother me when I see the so-called green rush. And the one constant in the marijuana trade is uncertainty. And that's the one thing I do like seeing, is that a lot of them are losing their shirts because the market's flooded.
Right.
And the process of growing legally in California, you're dealing with city, county, state. Everyone's taking a bite out of you at every level, and to try to be compliant is close to impossible. So it's kind of a joke, frankly. And then the dispensaries with their Frankenweed that you don't know what it was
Right.
grown in, you don't know who grew it, and it's funny saying this because I grew up around pot and smoked it a lot as a kid. But the idea that, they have this pot that's like 40% THC or something like that, or the high concentrates, that can't be good for you, smoking that stuff all the time with a torch.
Right.
It looks a little
Right.
too much like crack to me.
Yes, it does.
And it's just odd.
Yeah.
Kind of sometimes I find myself at odds with the culture, or strong edibles for people who have no experience with
Right.
marijuana. And all of a sudden they're having an hallucinogenic experience. So it isn't well graded. It isn't regulated. It's kind of anarchy. And I think it's got a long way to go, and kind of doing and seeing who's getting to the front of the line in North Carolina. Well, big ag, probably with links to tobacco and things like that. And I don't expect it to be any other way, but I certainly will make choices as a consumer as to who I patronize and who I don't.
In the short amount of time that we were up there testifying during this legislative session, there were so many changes to the bill about who was going to be, basically who was the one who was going to be making money off of
Yes.
this.
To do.
Yeah, it went from the interstate or multi-state providers to, well, first it went to North Carolinians only, and then it went to the multi-state providers, and then it went to people who had 5 years of cannabis agricultural experience, which basically eliminated anybody in North Carolina because it's not legal here. It was, and I'm sitting back there as the cynic, like, okay, clearly the strings are being pulled from behind in a lot of different ways. Peter, there are some states that allow individual people to just grow a certain number of plants in their backyard. Does that solve this problem? I understand that there's capitalism involved here, but if I can grow broccoli in my backyard and not have to go buy it at the grocery store, is there not an argument to be made that I could grow 4 or 5 plants?
Yeah, I think so, but I think it's harder than most people realize.
Yeah. You
it's
gotta have
kinda
some
like,
skill.
Yeah, it's kind of like growing
like keeping orchids alive.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you
Not
got
that hard.
well, here we got such a wet climate. You need sativas.
Do it indoors.
Yeah, but that's different.
Now, Paul, you actually served a life sentence.
Yes, I had a life sentence. I served 25 years
How did that happen?
for possession of marijuana. Well, I was a smuggler in California, small time, and I got arrested, and I was told that I had did all these things that I hadn't done. And I said, "You people are crazy. You can't prove this. You can't prove that I." Then later on, they did have in the trial things that I did do, and I was looking at maybe 10 years. Well, they came to me and said, "Oh, if you don't cooperate and tell us everything you know." I grew up on the border in San Diego, and I knew a lot of smugglers, and they said, "If you don't tell us everything you know, you're going to get a mandatory minimum life sentence." I said, "Mandatory minimum? Good God, what would the maximum be?" You know? I mean, I was afraid to ask that question. But so I said, I'm taking this to trial. You can't prove that I was in Arizona on this date. I've never been in that area of the country. You can't prove it. I was wrong. One day before trial, I heard my name called. I was in a cell in a county jail, and I went out and I looked around, and nobody was looking. There was no cop waving at me, you know. And I just happened to look down, and there was like a sheriff standing there with these two younger guys, and they were kind of looking around, and I didn't see anybody calling me, so I went back in my cell. Well, 2 days later, I'm going to preliminaries for the trial, and there's those two kids there. And it turns out they had been arrested for something like drunk driving or selling a small amount of cocaine to a cop. And the sheriff was there saying, that's the guy you're going to testify with, that you went to this place and picked up this load of drugs and took it over here. And they were all ready and willing to do that. And they do that to everybody that takes it to trial. They will find somebody and they'll come and lie about it.
How unbelievably corrupt.
Yeah, and it happens every day in every court. I'm nothing. I mean, it happens to everybody.
Well, there was a case, a guy named Brian Daniels, who was a big Thai trafficker, and he, I think, was the head of a conspiracy that moved something like 70 tons of Thai marijuana on 2 boats to the United States. And, you know, the boat captains got busted red-handed. Engines had to be shot out of their boats, actually captured in international waters. They cooperated, testified against everyone. I don't think they did, maybe 4 years, something. Brian Daniels refused to testify against anyone, went to trial. I think he did 22, 23.
Brian Daniels was lucky. He went to trial, I think, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because I found him before. It was when I was looking for the, big marijuana cases, and I was seeing all those 80s cases, and they served, maybe they were sentenced to 20 years, but they served 10. It all changed at the end of the 80s, but Brian Daniels was huge.
Yeah.
And what did you ask me? Because I forget so much. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Brian, I think I don't think he served more than 10.
No, he did 20.
Did he?
Yeah, he did 20
Well,
because
he
got
in touch with me when he got out and died.
Yeah. No, he's still alive. Yeah, yeah.
Where is he?
He may be back in Thailand.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Well, his family. I was positive it was another guy in Thailand who had a bar. That was kind of an easy thing.
Yeah.
It was an easy way. But they did get huge sentences. They didn't get life.
Yeah.
And if you don't have life, you get out. You have a chance.
Yeah, you get good
you get
time.
good time. So you don't serve your whole
every day that you're a good
time.
boy, they take a little bit off your sentence.
Well, you also see real class distinctions. Like some were very smart about the way that they surrendered. They'd surrender through sort of an intermediary who was already negotiating their plea. They would convince others. There was one group that moved, I think a 40-ton load, probably, $300 million, something like that, $200 million. And when they got busted, they orchestrated this very dramatic surrender. I'm going to go get my co-conspirator. He's going to surrender too. And they coughed up like $1.5 million, and the judge was like, "Oh wow,
Yeah.
oh, you guys, you're."
Later,
you're
he's
cured.
finding her brother $1.4 billion.
Yeah, and again, they were college educated. They were presentable. The judges recognized them as, oh, this could be my son, and you really do see
Just
that
regular maritime commerce. That's all. Just run of the mill stuff.
Well, and I mean, Paul especially because he was right on the border, but I grew up near the border, and smuggling is endemic to border regions. Period. Any border region, and it was the pot trade that I write about in Tie Stick really begins with surfers going down to go for the weekend to Tijuana and putting a few kilos in the panels of the station wagon.
Just driving them back home.
Driving them back. And that's really how it starts.
Yeah.
And as Beth's brother John says, it's like a pickup game. Like on this day, I'm going to work with this group. This guy talks too much. This guy drinks too much. I don't want to deal with him anymore. And you begin to see who's got tradecraft, probably like the military. Who's got tradecraft, who doesn't, who's a liability, who isn't. And, you have some very, very successful former military smugglers, but their biggest failing is a lack of flexibility. Because as Paul will tell you, everything's changing all the time. There's floating variables, weather, law enforcement, a cop on the beach. You're coming in to bring a load and there's campers, or you don't know. And your ability or inability to make variables and call variables at the line of scrimmage is what makes a good smuggler and a great smuggler and a horrible smuggler. And so
there's people camping on the beach. You tell them you've got a bunch of lobsters you're bringing in.
Or there was one group that used to dress in Smokey the Bear Rangers outfits and say, there's Coronado and we've got an escaped prisoner. No, you better get out of here. He's a manic murderer, rabid skunks, And they were. One group had an amphibious duck, and they would take it out and offload the duck, and so it is remarkable. Humans are ingenious, and when you're moving that kind of weight, that's what's funny now. Like, 1,000 pounds in a panga made it into Malibu, and you're talking about John Knock, like 30-ton loads they do 2 a year.
That's what they do.
Yeah, ocean-going tugs, oil rig supply vessels were very popular. One military group had, an ocean-going. They had a oil rig supply vessel, and then in shipping containers they had 2 cigarette boats painted with race colors, and something like 5 or 10 tons in each boat. They'd come right on the other side of the horizon from the Golden Gate Bridge. They'd come in at full speed under the Golden Gate Bridge with a helicopter following and filming them like it was a race, and hide in plain sight. And
that's right.
Do you think what you just described there, the decrease in the volume, was the intended consequence for, was that a deterrent to pin somebody like Paul for life?
No, I think it's unnecessary because they draw, again, unintended consequences. What happens when the ties get greedy, the quality of Thai pot goes down, and it's so much trouble to do this, so everybody starts growing it in America. So Northern California becomes the breadbasket of marijuana, and then we have similar weirdness with law enforcement in Northern California. Then what happens? The cartels come in.
Right.
Yeah. And we thought that the cartels, I heard recently from someone in the trade that the cartels are buying British Columbian pot to flood the California market with and trading meth in British Columbia for the pot.
Wow.
I mean, this is true capitalism, right? This isn't that bullshit of Wall Street getting bailed out because their bets go sour. Marijuana trade is true capitalism. This is Adam Smith. He would be proud of this. There's no safety net.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Safety net.
Yeah.
Oh, you the banks. Oh, geez.
Too big to fail. Bail out, all that coded language.
No
sure.
way. They should have gone down.
Yeah. Paul, you did 27 years. You
25 years, 2 months, and 19 days.
You didn't count though, did you?
I never counted a single one until way after I was out.
Did you? I'm not saying this as a joke, so please don't mind the turn of phrase, but did you have take some time to figure out why in the hell this happened to you? Like what you thought, why this?
I knew exactly why, because I got caught and people ratted me out about stuff. And I didn't have I don't have the heart to turn against somebody and cause somebody to go to prison. It's just something I couldn't do. But they did it to me, and I said, okay, fine. Well, I got myself in this mess. I'll get myself out, hopefully. And if it wasn't for Beth Curtis here, I probably wouldn't have gotten out myself. And I know 21 others who can say the same thing. 22 of us she's responsible for.
That was going to be my next question is clearly the connection was you helped him in some capacity. Can you tell that story, Beth, about when you saw Paul's story and just decided to go for it?
Yeah, the first thing I did then after I talked to Don Wertschafter and he helped me get documents online, I decided to try and find other people who had, not the guys from the 80s who were getting out or going to get out, but the ones who had life sentences that were not going to ever get out. And I started looking for them, and it was kind of funny because there's no way to find them but except to just ask people in various prisons. And I found about 10 or 12 pretty quick. So then I thought, well, what am I going to do with it? So I put it up on a website and told their stories of their cases. But then I started nagging my brother's trial attorney, who was Michael Kennedy.
Really famous lawyer.
He owned High Times and also was pretty much in control.
The magazine High Times?
Yeah. Pretty much in control of Normal. He was a very, very, very accomplished criminal defense attorney. He'd been an attorney for the Chicago 7 and lots of other high. Anyway, so I decided I wanted to break out the category because people didn't believe me when I put up the website. They didn't believe that was marijuana only and that they got a life sentence.
Yeah.
They thought they must have killed somebody or something. So I wanted to break out the category, so I wanted it to be as sympathetic as it could be. And I figured that would be people who had life sentences, who'd served at least 15 years, and who were over the age of 60. And I found 5 of them. I actually had more, but 2 of them one of them of the other ones was Randy Lanier and Eugene Fisher. And they had a pretty good chance of getting out without me having to do that. So I got it. Michael finally agreed, and David Holland,
who I went to college with,
who was his associate, and Michael wrote the petition to break out the category for 5 nonviolent marijuana offenders who needed clemency. Now, a group petition is not even mentioned anywhere. There's not such a thing, but it was a kind of a gimmick to get the category out there, and because I was tired of people saying that there wasn't such a thing too, and I figured if they'd write about the petition that it would happen. So that's what I did. And then just went from there. By the end of the Obama administration, all four of those were on the petition, and many, many more had gotten clemency, but my brother had not.
That's what I was going to ask. Was your brother?
I had a few more years to go.
Yeah.
And I still do.
Yeah. What does that effort look like? I mean, you write the petition, you got to get it in front of the President of the United States. Like, how does that work?
I did have a networking plan, and it was very primitive. I made cards, holiday cards, with these guys' pictures on them for every holiday, like Memorial Day, Happy Memorial Day, we're celebrating our freedom. And then flip it over, these people are serving life sentences for marijuana. And they were primitive. I put them in envelopes, I hand addressed them and hand stamped them because people do not open mail with an address label or a stamp.
Mm-hmm.
I sent them to congressmen, I sent them to law schools, I sent them to every criminal justice reform organization that I could, and I called them, and I went to visit them. I went to D.C. I went wherever I'd think anybody would listen. But those stinking cards, actually, I didn't get a lot of response from them. But people, when they met me, they'd know. And I wrote letters. I sent them to everywhere. over and over and over again for years.
Yeah, she never quit.
Yeah.
Yeah, never quit.
That is the lesson. The nucleus of the lesson is you can't send something one time and expect it to make an impact.
Heavens, nobody cares.
Yeah.
They won't know you until you've nagged them to death. I mean, I've nagged them to death. They probably would say, "Oh God, it's her again."
Yeah, well, Beth Curtis is calling again.
Okay, yes.
Tell him I'm on the other line.
Come on over for lunch. It was like that.
Do you remember the first big moment that you got through to somebody that could either put you in touch with the next right person or was a key decision maker that could help this move for you?
One of the first persons that helped me was Eric Sterling, who I don't know if anybody knows who he is. He had an advocacy group in just outside of D.C., and he was one of the prosecutors who lobbied for the crime bill for mandatory minimums. He had a change.
Crime bill?
No,
Yeah.
in the 80s.
Oh.
He had a change of heart, and he started an organization for sentencing reform. And then I got in touch with Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and it's an organization that lobbies for sentencing reform in D.C. Of course, normal. I stalked them. The Open Society, I find a woman by the name of Nikichi Taifa had a huge grant from them, and she put me on their clemency committee, so I could go to D.C. every quarterly, and she'd have the press would be there. You could talk about your stuff. It was pretty good because she had a lot of contacts with the Obama administration, but I didn't stay with those. By the time the Trump administration was over, I had support from everybody. Right on Crime. What's his name in Texas? Pat Nolan. Very right. Very, very conservative groups.
And we met through David Holland. Who's kind of inherited Kennedy's law firm.
Yeah.
And, but again, it was a loose coalition. And, and I look at some of the cannabis, some I don't like, some I do like, and some I can't deal with, and Beth dealt with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's, again, you get into the narcissism of small differences like you military guys, like, oh, those guys over there, oh, that, but it's hard to bring people
I cared
together.
nothing about about their disagreements.
And you don't come from the pot culture either.
No, I don't.
Which is interesting.
I smoked once in '68. No, I don't. No, I didn't. I didn't care about anything, except if they could find a little mercy and compassion in their heart to make some contacts and lobby for what I wanted. And that's still the way I feel. And I do feel like shaming the cannabis industry. I don't think that they have any integrity whatsoever as long as people are serving sentences for marijuana.
Why do you think that?
Because they're spending lots of money lobbying for their businesses, making hundreds of millions of dollars, while people are still in cages for the product they're selling, and they're not doing enough to change that.
Have you've met with them? And
Of course, many cannabis industries have received my correspondence.
yeah.
They won't meet with me. I just write.
They
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
don't.
Like, oh, great.
And I talk
Maguire's
to them.
writing another one.
Yeah, and I do talk to them when I see them.
Wow.
And,
They look the other way.
And I won't set foot in a dispensary.
Yeah.
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 Against
it's
my
shameful,
religion.
really. It's really
Yeah.
shameful. And it's shameful.
Yeah, especially when you see, I would think, billions of dollars worth of industry being built around something that
has taken the lives of so many
exactly.
Well, they're carpetbaggers.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Californians that are now in the families in the third generation in the cannabis trade. And, you know, it's the grandkids now. And, you know, their parents, their grandparents ran penitentiary risks for something that is now cool and groovy and, you know, CBD, and this and that. And it's just odd. The whole thing's odd.
I don't know why I just had this thought. I wonder, is there a parallel to like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, the people who built the country and took a lot of risk building the infrastructure of the United States of America, and then it just gets more watered down by generation, and then you've just got a bunch of bratty kids that have $1 billion to their name in a trust fund?
Well, look what we worship today, you know, celebrity and, you know, very ephemeral things. And I don't, but most people do. I think that will change, though. I think we're in a very volatile moment, and that resourcefulness and independence and these kinds of things may well come back into the vogue out of necessity, the mother of invention.
Man's a prophet, man. The man is a prophet.
I don't know about that. But no, I think everything's easy, you know, and I don't think a lot of young people know what kind of trouble you get in for, you know, I mean, I almost got in real trouble when I was about 20 and got caught in New Mexico with a, you know, trunk full of weed, and they didn't find it. And I didn't admit that I had it, and boy, did I make some bargains with whoever's running the upstairs.
I promise I won't do it. Yeah.
And the hardest thing was when the guy, I mean, he tore my car apart, and it was vacuum bagged and wiped down in gas, so you couldn't smell, a dog couldn't smell it. And I mean, he went through everything. He was lying down in the back of my car smelling like a dog. And I was like, don't know what you're talking about, sir. And the great line was, he goes, son, you have a brown stain on your lip. You're bleeding out your eyes, and I smell the fruity herbal aroma of marijuana. No, sir, I don't know what you're talking about. No, sir, no, sir. And so finally he said, we're going to strike a little deal. And I thought, man,
here we go.
Going to say, like, you give me 5, you know, you give it to me now, you only get 5 years in New Mexico, which is a bad state to get caught in. And he said, you keep it under 55, well, we're in New Mexico, and we'll call it even. And that was the hardest part, because I almost jumped in his arms and was like, I promise.
Man, I got so much pot on me, thank you.
And I was like, yes, sir.
Yeah. Say nothing else, just you don't close past the sale, just get in the car and go.
Come carry New Mexico.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I grew up on the border in San Diego with Mexico. And when I was young, I'm 71 years old now, when I was young, there was no fence on the beach. And we were kids, we'd just walk down and go into Tijuana and down the beach, and we'd drink a few beers and have some tacos and go home. And then I started to smoke pot, and I saw what it was costing over here and what I could pay for it over there, and one thing led to another. And luckily the Navy SEALs at the amphibious base had a nice spot right there, and ended up getting a nice big military truck, and whew.
You took the truck? They took.
I bought a truck.
Yeah.
That looked just like what they were using when they were had buds training. You know, and and there was a road there right between the Naval Amphibious Base and the state park, and there was a little road there, and you could drive down, and a boat could come in, and you know, it was just fun.
Yeah.
It was just fun.
Yeah.
It was profitable, but more, it was just fun. And then I remember I was driving down the highway one time, and I get pulled over for speeding, and I had 4 joints in my pocket. And this Coronado cop reached in, pulled the 4 joints out, looked at them, took 2, put them in his pocket, the other 2 in mine, said, keep the speed down, son. Go on. That's the way it used to be.
Yeah, it really wasn't.
Yeah.
We were sure pot was going to be legal.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like,
Is that where what the feeling was?
I got busted with 6 tons back in 1974. And at the time, I was facing a maximum of 5 years at that time. I got a 3-year sentence. When I walked into prison to do that sentence, I thought, I'm not going to be here 3 years before they legalize it. They're going to let me go. That was in 74, you know, and it's still not legal. I live in Ohio. I can buy pot legally in the state. It doesn't make any sense.
So why are we 47 years removed from that, and it's still just only being legalized? Is it the tobacco industry?
Somebody's making money. Well, it
No, I
might
don't
be
think-
the unions, the police, the prosecutors, the judges' unions. Could be some tobacco companies, some alcohol companies. That used to be, I think, more important than it is now.
And also
but-
culture.
Yeah.
It's
You know?
a subversive drug, you
Yeah.
know, and it, makes people introspective.
Yeah.
And initially it was a black drug. It was a Mexican drug. And particularly in the beginning, when does marijuana become illegal? When the prohibition ends.
Yeah.
Who becomes key? Harry Anslinger.
Anslinger, yeah.
So Anslinger's a prohibition guy, and then prohibition ends, and then that's when Reefer Madness and the lady smoked pot. And I mean, when the movie Reefer Madness,
Yeah,
they say,
that poster is so apocalyptic.
And the white college girls, they smoke marijuana with the Negroes and get sympathetic towards their cause, and and that's how this booga booga,
Yeah.
the big booga booga
Yeah.
horn, whether it's terrorists
Right.
or they.
Yeah. Well, you think about like when we were coming up, it was the Dare to Keep Kids Off Drugs campaign, and that like bold red letters and all that messaging. I mean, if you look at it from a marketing perspective or an advertising perspective, or more nefariously a propaganda perspective, it was intended to, the only thing we ever heard as kids was marijuana's a gateway drug. You do marijuana, you're going to be, hitting crystal meth in the ditch. That's the next logical thing. So it's.
But now we're at a place where we're so broken with opiates, right? And we can't address the problem because big pharma made the problem. Right? And so, yeah, people are doing heroin now because they can't afford pharmaceuticals anymore. But I have all kinds of reprobate friends I grew up with in California, and if I want to know anything about any drug, I call them.
Yeah.
And they say, no, we want they tell me everything, and this is how we do it, and we da-da-da-da-da. We don't want street drugs. We want the big, I forget what they call them, but they're all these synthetic opiates, and that's what they want. And they have all kinds of scams to get them, and this and that and the other thing. And so because of the power of big pharma, we can't really, the homeless problem, a lot of it is drug addiction. And again, we don't identify the problem. We can't identify the problem, much like terrorism, much like that. So the idea that we're going to continue putting resources into marijuana when it's legal all over the country and not addressing the opiate problem, which is the most terrifying thing to me as a parent, and when I talk to my kids and I hear these stories about Chinese fentanyl pills and somebody thinks it's ecstasy, and we had a situation in Wrightsville Beach, some kid who's off to go to college, sports star, everything, never really done anything wrong, takes an ecstasy pill, it's fentanyl, boom, dead. And that's what I tell my kids, I know you're going to reach an age, you're going to want to do things. I'm not in any position to sit in judgment, right? I can't lie to my kids about my past. I've written about it. And there are parts I'm not necessarily proud of, but I was really only ever involved in marijuana.
Right.
I never was involved in any kind of cocaine or heroin or anything like that. And there was a huge taboo. And if you brought up heroin around us at a certain point, you get beaten up. I mean, it was that taboo.
Yeah.
It was a transgression, and I was at one time in my life, someone said, "Hey," and it was interesting. The first time I ever saw heroin was rich kids on the East Coast at college. Nobody I knew in California. Everybody knew better, and these were trust fundies, and so again, our dishonesty with ourselves makes it impossible to solve this and many other societal problems like education as well. And so I better shut up now.
No, you can keep going. I'll ask you one more to needle you. In 2019, I was in the same position as you, Paul, in 74. I would have said in 2019, if President Trump got reelected, it would probably be federally legal within his second term.
I believe that.
Is it going to happen? Is Biden have the chutzpah to get it through, or is this is we're now it's getting punted again and again and again like we've seen since '74?
If you look at CNBC when they're talking about marijuana, I get the impression that somebody knows that something's getting ready to happen. The marijuana stocks surged in the last few days, and so but I've been wishful thinking for 50, 60 years.
yeah, that's what I'm asking.
It's going to be legal anytime.
Yeah,
It's gonna be, and here I am. So.
Are there speculators that control that, much like there is oil?
No, I don't think so. I think it's it's diffused.
Right.
I mean, I know AG Bear's got a big, I forget, HW Pharmaceutical or one of them, that's one of the biggest, very like pharmaceutical. Yeah, GW. Yeah.
It's now Jazz, Jazz. It's in fact it's registered. I think it's registered in San Diego now. It started in Bristol, England.
Yeah, and that was and that was Bear too, right?
I don't know if they had an investment in it.
Yeah.
It was GW Pharmaceuticals. It was.
And then there were groups trying to patent.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody was trying to patent
the government has a
cannabis
patent
or
on
something.
it.
Yeah.
I've got a copy of it.
Well, and that's remarkable too. The whole way, where they say, "Oh, medical marijuana doesn't work. We have no evidence." That's because you had the one farm at the University of Mississippi, and if you wanted to test it, you had to go through this incredibly difficult process. And then if you actually got it, it was bunk.
Yeah.
And it was crappy weed, and so your metrics are off.
Yeah, the FDA has allowed no actual substantive data to.
What's the name of the guy who runs that farm? He's a classic. He was.
I don't know.
And he, he basically said marijuana leads to homosexuality, and was relieved of his position.
Really?
Yeah, and that was, I think, during the Reagan administration.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
the problem is, federally, marijuana is on the Controlled Substance
Right.
Act as a Schedule
Schedule I,
drug,
right.
more dangerous than fentanyl and OxyContin.
And this is why
That's
they won't study it for its medical purposes, right?
It's an outrage. I kind of see it as a problem with the administrative state. I mean, these agencies dig into their issues, and they have so many people who are employed because of it. They don't want to change. They'll study it forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When they say we need more studies before we can change, they don't need more studies. They have hundreds of thousands of
Right.
studies.
5,000 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, hundreds of studies. If you just go through, look for Harvard studies about marijuana, you will find a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find hundreds in every college and drug organization.
Well, Fiorello, LaGuardia, you go back through U.S. history.
It's been studied to death.
Right.
Because
It's-
soldiers always smoke. You go
Right.
to a theater where there's pot, soldiers are going to smoke weed.
We were worried Matt would
know.
never come back.
From Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
Vietnam and Cambodia
Yeah,
had some
yeah.
really good stuff, I'll
Yeah.
tell you.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's for sure. And it's funny. And the U.S. military was really the people who began the Thai marijuana trade because you would send it via Army post office and
APOFP.
and that was the real beginning of it. So
Back to your question
Yeah.
when you were asking about Biden. During the campaign, he was against legalizing marijuana, and he's pretty much stuck with that. Now, things may change. Hopefully, someone can whisper in his ear and pay him a lot of money or whatever they need to do. But in order to be a Schedule I controlled substance, their own ruling says that it can't have any recognized medical use.
Exactly.
And people have gone, look
Right.
at all the people,
Right.
the medical marijuana people using it, and it's helping them.
And it's amazing to
It's
me that
helping.
we have healthcare providers and practitioners that are in our country that are for this.
Yeah.
And still turn a blind eye away to a cacophony of people in this country of licenses.
one thing about medical marijuana that I want to bring up that's important and where I really saw that it was a medicine was during the 80s, I moved to New York and went to college, and I dated a ballerina for about 8 years and was in the world of high-level ballet, and AIDS cut through the ballet world like you would never, so a lot of guys that I knew that were friends got AIDS, and the only thing that allowed them to eat was smoking and eating marijuana. Then PTSD, not SSRIs, not antipsychotic medications, but marijuana, much more effective. Then I see it like I've had several older people that I know, very conservative, non-marijuana people, and they're having problems with their opiates, with constipation, digestion, all this stuff, and then addiction. And I've been able to wean them off opiates with very, very strong THC CBD. Right. And the CBD stuff, there's a lot of mythology and confusion around. In my opinion, it needs the THC, it needs the intoxicants to get the full spectrum. Right. And that's the opinion of many experts, but I'm not a scientist by any stretch. But
philosopher for sure.
I see this anecdotally all the time, and I really saw it during the AIDS years. But again, my own father, not the most conservative guy in the world, but hadn't smoked pot since the 70s. And when he fell and broke his hip and was in real pain and not able to sleep and stuff, I was able to get, like I said, these really strong pharmaceutical THC, CBD pills made with real good indica. And the guy slept 10 hours a night, every night, and he took them until the day he died last year.
Was that a difficult thing for you to do, convince your dad?
My dad had seen plenty.
Yeah, so he's
being
like
my dad.
All right.
So
I
it wasn't like
he had him for a son.
Yeah. My relationship.
He's like, all right, Peter, whatever. Yeah.
It wasn't like my relationship. Actually, my dad really liked smugglers because my dad was a mariner. So he was crossing
tradesman
paths.
appreciation.
And he had a beach house in Santa Barbara where some huge loads were offloaded. And so I had a dinner. This was when I was older. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where I had David Ortiz, Mike Ritter.
Big Poppy?
I had some big multi-ton smugglers come to dinner at my dad's house. They say, oh yeah, we used to bring in, our offload crew would meet at the bowling alley, and we'd all get in a Winnebago, and we'd go down there, and we'd take off 10 tons in a night. And, again, trade craft that is every bit as good as the SEALs with much shittier equipment.
Give some appreciation, right? Yeah. That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
And so, no, California, there's actually some respect for it. It's part of our culture,
right?
I go out there and people throw pot at me. Look at what I grew this year. Look at mine's better than his, and his is better than mine. And
Matt's like, can we book a flight? Can I come with you?
And like I said, the third generation guys, I mean, they're so good at this now. And I only like pot that's grown in the dirt outside. And I can't really even smoke much anymore because I have kids and something's always going wrong. Somebody's getting hurt. Somebody needs to be driven somewhere. So it's not really fun. I call it dwell now because you smoke and then you dwell on taxes or you dwell on, But in any case, I do go out there, and I like to go out there, around this time of year, and harvest season is a little, depending. But and now, my old stomping grounds in Santa Barbara County is one of the premier. You go to the viticulture places where the wine's grown, and that's where the really good pot's grown as well.
That's everything about that area.
So when you're ready to go, you let me know, and
I'll carry your suitcase for you.
Josh is checking flights right now. Is SFO the fastest way to fly in and then drive down, or?
No, it's amazing.
Yeah. Beth, Paul, I can't thank you both enough for coming here and sharing your story. If somebody wants to engage with you or they want to assist, what is the best way to go about helping you in your mission?
Just look at lifeforpot.com, and Paul actually has a website.
Yep, I have veteranofthewaronDrugs.com.
Okay. And you've got the Veteran of the Cannabis War T-shirt. I
Yes.
quite like
I have
that.
right now. I have T-shirts that say all sorts of stuff. I'm a veteran of the war on drugs, veteran of the cannabis war, the weed war, the pot war, the ganja war. I got the domain names on all of them. and
He's got
they're
some
available for a
cannabis real estate.
donation. It's a 501c3
Okay.
nonprofit organization. I take in funds that I send out to people in prison and some who've gotten out recently if they need clothes, boots. I just sent a guy to California the other day that got a job at a winery, and he had
Wow.
new boots on that I bought for him. So we're small, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. We'll put both of those websites up on the show notes. We'll be sure to push them out through our social media channels. And Matt, let's go ahead and buy some T-shirts. We're going shopping on your website here in just a
Okay.
second, Paul. So
I've got some with me. So.
yeah. Oh, excellent. Well, then I hope you brought cash, Matt.
Yeah.
We only work in cash.
You only work in cash, right? It's a cash business.
Belly to belly, man.
Yeah. I don't want anybody to ask me if I was here, on November
Belly to
11th.
belly.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of Signal Fire Radio. Thank you so very much to our guests, Beth Curtis, Paul Free, and Peter Maguire. Until next time, go be a Signal Fire in your community. We'll talk to you next week. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Signal Fire Radio. If you enjoyed it, please do not forget to connect with us on social media and click, subscribe, and turn on notifications here on the YouTube page so you'll never miss a minute of our content. Also, if you are an ambitious leader and you are involved in ambitious leadership and you want to be a guest on Signal Fire Radio, please get in touch with us. You can email matt@signalfire.media or rob@signalfire.media. We would love to talk to you about how you can get on our show, tell the world what your value is, and showcase your ambitious leadership across the digital landscape. We will talk to you next week.